Asia has become one of the world's most digitized economic regions, and it's also becoming one of the world's potentially most targeted. Threats are escalating potentially faster than defenses are being built. Insurers are recalibrating their risk models as well to take all of this into account. Incident response teams are confronting cyber breaches that cross borders, clouds, and regulatory regimes. And the central question is no longer whether a cyber attack will happen, but whether organizations are properly prepared when it does. This episode wants to know, what does cyber resilience look like in Asia today? How are attackers evolving their methods as AI, cloud, fintech, and Web3 reshape the region's digital landscape? And what new role should cyber insurers, forensic responders, and enterprises play to prevent systemic level events? Joining us today are Paul Jackson, the CEO at Theos Cyber. Did I say that right?
You certainly did.
Awesome. And Gene Yu, the CEO of Black Panda. To answer these questions and more, guys, thank you both for coming and joining us today. How are you doing?
Doing good, thanks. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us, Michael.
It's great to have you both back on the platform. Hey, Gene.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me. And good to meet you, Paul, as well.
Yeah, good to meet you too, Gene. Yeah.
Okay, let's start with this. As I mentioned in the intro, as Asia becomes one of the world's most digitized regions, what does it take for organizations, large and small, to be cyber resilient in a world where the threats, the tech, and the rules of engagement seem to be changing faster than ever? Paul, why don't we start with you and then we can go to Gene.
Yeah, look, I'm going to dispute a little bit of that because I don't think that the rules of engagement are changing faster than the defenses, where the defenses are properly applied, right? And therein, of course, lies the problem, because right across Asia, we're finding that a very small percentage of companies, organizations, whatever, are actually setting up proper defense and resilience. And, as we talk through today, we're going to talk a lot about what that actually means to companies, what they should be doing and what they aren't doing currently. But you're right. We need to be, well, to answer the question, first of all, we need to be adaptable. I mean, we need to be able to merge, if you like, the technical rigor around security along with cultural awareness, because we operate in Asia, and there is a lot of nuances, as I'm sure Gene will talk about as we go through this. We both work across Asia, and it's an interesting dynamic, to say the least, right? And ensuring that we have layered defenses, but they're combined with rapid detection capabilities, and that you have a fostered environment of vigilance, if you like, across your employee workforce. Ensuring that you're dealing with the low-hanging fruit, sorry, not flutes, and that you have, if you are working across different jurisdictions in the region, that you have this collaboration, that your entities are talking to one another, and they're aware that if there is an issue affecting one, then it's likely to affect all their jurisdictions. And are they planning for that? Are they, do they have resilience in place to deal with those kind of issues? So, and then of course you got the thorny issue, if you are operating in more than one jurisdiction here, of the regulatory requirements, and of course the geopolitical nuances that go on, and all those kind of factors, which hopefully we'll talk about as we go through this. But Gene, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I take Michael's question a little bit more straight on the nose. In insurance, which Black Panda is a Lloyd's of London insurance company, we define resilience as essentially response and the recovery phases. So I just look at the aspect of resilience being how fast can you get back on your feet after the cyber attack occurs? How well do you minimize the financial impact of the event itself? And so I mean, straight down the arrow, or straight down the pipe, I guess the simplest and kind of lazy answer for me is get cyber insurance, right? I mean, these are the things that you get when you get the risk transfer for the financial aspect as well as the response, right? So it looks like, Paul, you want to chime in there?
Well, now here we go, straight into it, right?
Go for it.
So cyber insurance, of course, companies must have it, right? And it's necessary. It's risk management, as Gene says. It's risk transfer. But yeah, I worry because I see some clients that are over reliant on the insurance and haven't looked at the small print, things like that. There's a lot that goes on in cyber insurance. For example, the deductibles, right? very often clients are not 100% aware of what is covered, what's not covered. And when it comes to quick help, I think also they're too reliant on the insurance providers. Ring them up and say, "Hey, who's going to help me respond to this? Who's going to help me recover?" And very often they rely on the insurance companies to say, "Well, Black Panda, Theos, or whoever are there to help you," without having that forethought and planning ahead. So to your point, Gene, resilience is super important, but it's more than just buying insurance, etc. It's the whole prep beforehand. It's doing tabletop exercises, as we're talking about. It's doing, making sure you know who your partners are, your legal partners, your IR, DFIR partners, and ensuring that is robust and tested to the nth degree. And that's when
Absolutely.
you get resilience.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with more. If you don't mind, Michael, I'll chime in again. So at Black Panda, at least, we tried to categorize this simply for, especially the layman. We call it the 3 R's of readiness, response, and recovery, right? And the readiness is the component that I think a lot of enterprises out there overlook, even the larger, more sophisticated companies. My background as a former American Special Forces officer at U.S. Army Survival School, there was this huge sign we used to walk underneath every day to the training area that said in large capital letters, "The key to survival is preparation." Right. And that is what it's all about, is getting all that stuff ready right in advance so that when crisis hits, you actually know, for example, what is Theos's number to call immediately, right, to get the responders on site, to get that time containment as fast as possible. So anyway, I just wanted to caveat, by no means do I mean that cyber related resilience is just buying insurance. That is certainly
No, I know you
easiest.
didn't. I was just saying.
This answer. But just straight down the pipe of the actual definition of resilience.
But it's definitely an important component, and in no way would I advise any client not to have cyber insurance. But to me, it's there for the entity threatening event. It's there for the real crisis, and I think organizations need to have 2 levels of planning over resilience. Have cyber insurance for that major event, the one that could kill your company or organization, and have the other planning for the minor incidents that could turn into those big incidents. Having firemen, if you like, on standby to put out a fire before it becomes an inferno and destroys your whole organization. And that combination, I think, of constant testing, of having somebody on standby that knows what they're doing and knows your company, knows your people, is super important, because you can't expect internal resources to know a very complex subject, which is DFIR, right? And therefore, you need an extension of your team, if you like, a partnership with companies like Black Panda or Theos that can be there, the firemen, to instantly respond under, without signing contracts when something's going wrong. The last thing you want to be doing in an incident is, negotiating indemnity clauses or limits of liability, right? Do that all in advance, and that all factors into resilience and being, as you say, Gene, prepared.
Paul, I want to follow up on one of the things you said at the beginning, where you said where the defenses are properly applied, right? This was part of your pushback. But if the idea is that the defenses are not always properly applied everywhere, and I'm just thinking in my head as both of you were talking about this stuff, big companies now, they're more digital, means that they're more connected to other companies that may or may not have the proper defenses. How likely is it that in this really sort of deeply connected economy, where let's say a big company connects to an SME for some type of thing, or even if it's an API connection, something, how much more risk does that engender from a cybersecurity perspective? Just the fact that all those things are so connected, and how much more complex does it make the 3 R's, if you'll give me that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll jump in on this one, because as an insurance company, we actually look for that, right? That is one of the key aspects of how we price the insurance policy, is what the third-party risk and exposures are. I'm sure Paul will agree with this about an aspect of incident response. I think that the essence of the importance of incident response is speed of containment, to limit the internal spread of damage, and then even more importantly, to prevent it jumping outside of the victim's network into external parties as well, which creates more market reputation loss, damage, et cetera. Those are the biggest concerns, right? So, to answer your question, Michael, I think it's enormous in terms of how much digital risk is occurring as technology continues to advance and we become more and more interconnected. That's what we talk about in terms of in cybersecurity as the attack surface, right? It just continues to widen from this aspect with more and more vulnerabilities and gaps. And there's certainly no shortage of need and value and work in this space. It continues to grow, right?
Yeah, 100%. And third-party risk, wow. When we talk to CISOs, we work with clients large and small, right? And there's two different ways of looking at it. It's obviously the large companies that rely on the supply chain, the vendors, the third parties, etc., and those smaller companies that may be part of that supply chain. And so, from the perspective of the larger companies, this is huge, right? They're generally regulated. They have to comply with ensuring the security of those third parties. And the only way they can do that is through rigorous, assessments, testing, etc., and validation of their controls that they have in place. From a small company point of view, this is becoming more of a pain, if I'm being honest. Right?
And probably expensive, no?
It's very expensive. Yeah, it can be. I mean, they come to us saying, "Look, we can't get this deal across unless we do a pen test, or in certain cases a red team test." Where we have to really dig in. And obviously Theos as a company, we get asked a lot to do pen testing, red team testing. And, they're always asking us, oh, how much is this going to cost? Is this, and my answer to them is, look, take this seriously. Look, this will apply across all your clients. You can show them with pride that you've met these certain standards and that you're taking cyber seriously. And that goes a long way to your, enhancing your business. You can put that out there as a business, plus, if you like, in your own world, and trying to explain that to smaller companies that this shouldn't be a burden, but rather it's something that's actually beneficial to them is sometimes challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, sorry, Michael, if I could
No,
chime
go ahead.
in.
Please,
One of the things, even before we started talking, I can kind of tell Paul has the same view, and with his extensive experience in Asia. We have a long tail of small, medium businesses here in Asia, right?
I was just going to ask, so I'm glad you're saying this, because I was going to ask what is unique about Asia in this environment. So please go ahead, because that was my next question. Yeah.
So SMBs are notoriously a difficult segment to target, right? Just in advanced and developed markets, right? Enterprise, we can go after them with high complexities, sales cycles, but there's high ticket sizes or ticket checks. When you close a deal that are worthwhile and make the customer acquisition cost worth it. Then on the other extreme, you have low complexity and low price. Well, now we're talking about something that needs to be quite automated for consumers, right? Very, very low cost, very low customer acquisition cost to make those business models work. The problem with small, medium businesses is that they're low price but high complexity, right? They go through sales cycles in the same time frame as an enterprise, and then pay you very little on the back end, and it's very difficult to survive as a business. Well, the thing is, actually, it took me years for me to realize, and maybe Paul, being more experienced, came to this conclusion a lot earlier. But what I discovered was that we call businesses in Asia enterprises, or even very large enterprises, and then categorize another SMB. But actually, what categorizes as an SMB or enterprise in Asia is much smaller than what you would call that in the US or maybe in the UK and other places, right? And so actually what we're talking about is here, when we're talking about going after enterprise in Asia, they're actually SMBs, right? And so we get these long sales cycles and very price sensitive mindsets that make it very difficult for our side, at least, to transact, right? Because it's just challenging. SMBs, as I mentioned, low price but high complexity sales cycles.
No, you're right. And just in Japan alone, there are 3.4 million, by the latest statistics, small and medium-sized businesses. That's just one country across our region, although Japan is famous for having many SMBs. But you're 100% right, Gene. It is quite unique to Asia, isn't it? Really, the vast number of these small companies all competing and all, again, at the minimal margins. So cost is everything to them, and yet they can be, a point of risk for in that supply chain for the pride. I mean, a good example is perhaps cell phone manufacturing, where honestly there's so many different components to a cell phone across, a lot across China, obviously, but other parts of the region. And at what point does that become a risk to the overall security of that cell phone? We've seen in the last couple of years those cheap Android phones that you can buy across, online. are actually infected with spyware, with adware. In other words, they're being directed to make money for the attackers by building up ad, clicks, click rates. Sorry, and this is just one example of how something that's small, and no one knows where in the supply chain that particular malware got injected in, but and it's a complex subject. So I think across Asia, we really are unique in that angle, in that aspect, that so many companies, so much to protect.
But if that's the case, right? And I'm just thinking about this like in my own experience. When you're working at a big company, they're very careful. And like you said, like I worked at Goldman Sachs, so highly regulated. If they had some sort of cyber problem, it's going to be not just all over the news, but like all over the world, right? And they have to spend as much money as they possibly can because there's so much money at stake to make sure that their businesses are protected. But it seems to me, particularly in Asia, and based on what you guys have just said, that if there are, what did you say, 3.7 million businesses, 3.4 million businesses in Japan alone? Well, I mean, add Indonesia in there, add Vietnam in there, add Malaysia in there, you add the Philippines in there, and frankly, even if you add Singapore and Hong Kong, there are all these little businesses around that aren't as prepared. But if you're trying to automate their setup into getting cyber resilience and cyber protection, are attackers also automating all of their stuff at an even higher level, particularly with the onset and the usage of AI, that they're so at risk, right? Because some of these businesses have been in business for like 2 or 3 generations. I know that's true in Japan. I know that's true out here as well. They're so at risk that even if you can just attack 12 of them, right, you're still going to be able to profit deeply from that as well. And even if they're complex, how do you go and convince those guys that they really need this more than ever? Does that make sense?
It does. Let me take first stab at this, if it's
Go
all right,
ahead.
Gene.
Yeah,
but yeah, so look, I think there's a misconception among small businesses that cyber has to cost a lot. And I dispute that, because I think you take the basic steps, hygiene, cyber hygiene, 2-factor authentication on all your accounts, and basically get rid of all the low-hanging fruit. You're immediately eliminating a lot of the risk. The second part is obviously employees, making sure they're part of your cybersecurity team, if you like. That they're fully trained and aware. It doesn't cost much, right? And a little bit of time and effort in ensuring the basics and the employee awareness. You don't need to buy into the latest and greatest tools. That will eliminate. And don't forget, the attackers tend to go after the easier targets. So if you make yourself a harder target, the survival of the fittest, right? So it's the same in cyber. And at a certain very large organization that I used to work at, the CEO always said, we're never going to be 100% secure, but as long as we're more secure than XYZ Bank and QRS Bank, whatever, they're happy. So it honestly, it is joking aside, it is making yourself harder, making yourself a more difficult target, and that doesn't have to cost the earth. So I think the problem is that message doesn't get across, and those steps aren't being taken. And quite honestly, those we work with, small companies, very often think, well, actually, that wasn't so difficult, right? We've raised our security posture, we've raised our resilience, if you like, and it didn't cost us an awful lot.
Yeah, I mean, we play a lot in the SMB space, for better or for worse, and I think one of the things that we've seen from our data is that I couldn't agree more with what Paul just said. I mean, I think we categorized over 92% of the incident response cases we've had with SMBs are due to very basic vulnerabilities, just misconfigured VPNs, leaked credentials, open RDP ports, right? Remote desktop protocol
access.
ports, just completely open, which is akin to having your front door, frankly, wide open at your house, And so, when SMBs or this type of topic comes up, and they're always asking, what do we do about AI? Or even, God forbid, ask me about quantum computing, and what we should do about the quantum computing threat. I'm like, hey man, why don't you just lock your front door first,
right?
And then we'll talk.
Right. Then we'll talk about
So
nuclear
true.
missiles
So
after
true.
that. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's
Right,
like,
right.
what do we do if a Tomahawk missile comes and hits us? So lock your front door first. And we'll talk about the other stuff later, right?
Let's talk about the other stuff later. So are you? I like what what Paul was saying earlier about you just have to be like not the easiest target. It reminds me of the story of the bear in the woods, right? You don't have to be able to outrun the bear. You just have to be able to outrun the guy who's with you.
Yeah, that's right.
So true. Yeah.
Kind of sounds like the same thing. I wanted to follow up on something that both of you said before, right? This idea of we're so interconnected and that you have to do these like third-party checks and you do pen tests and all this other stuff. At the end of the day, though, and this is really maybe for me more than anything, but like where does the liability lie, right? So let's say like in a world where there are 3 companies that are connected, right? Just to make it really simple. I've done all my cyber work and all this stuff, and I think I'm doing a really good job. And then another company has done some work, and another company hasn't done a ton of work on this, and they get hacked, and somehow that sneaks into me. Like, where does the liability lie, or is it just on an incident-by-incident basis?
Yeah, let me take a quick one, and then because I know, Gene, you're more of an expert on this than I am. But I would say that before you get into the legalities and the litigation, you've got to get the evidence, right? And I'll give you a good example of this is business email compromise, right? So you get a fraud that goes on where the company X has sent an invoice to company Y, or apparently sent an invoice to company Y, but hacker Z has already hacked into the mail system of one of the two and facilitated that fraudulent communication, wherein banking details were changed, and hence the next invoice is sent to the fraudster's bank account. We see these disputes all the time, and where does the fault lie? Well, it needs an investigation of both sides, mailboxes really, or systems, their setups, in order to determine where the likely breach occurred before who picks up the bill for, say, $1 million invoice that went the wrong direction, right? So it's a complex thing, but I think investigations are important. Getting the right team in, or teams, if you need to do 2 different organizations, to actually get to the facts before you even start on the legal stuff. So I don't know what you think about that, Gene. But.
Yeah, no, spot on, Paul. I mean, it comes down to the forensics, right? I like to refer to the digital forensics side of what we do as the arson investigation, right? To use Paul's, we also use the firefighting analogy a lot. I think it's easiest for people to understand that. Yeah. So, depending on what the arson investigators determine as the cause of the fire, right, and where it started, and that's what's going to come around, particularly in the insurance claims process of who was at fault and these sort of aspects, right? So, that actually just highlights a point for the audience as well to know that when cyber insurance, when a cyber insurance policy triggers or activates, the very first folk in are the digital forensics incident response guys, right? Incident response first, of course, time to contain, right, to make sure that internal damage and external spread doesn't happen, or it's at least limiting as much as possible. And as soon as we know the environment is safe, then it turns into the investigation of what happened, right? And that's the evidence that everybody basically hangs their hat on after that. It's all about the DFIR guys first, right? And that's why we're the most important to have on standby 24/7.
Yeah, get the facts,
Yep.
and then you'd have to talk to a lawyer about the rest of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Fair enough. I was honestly, I was just curious, like where it works, because look, we're a small company as well, and I'm amazed actually at the number of emails that I get that are trying to trick me into doing something. That
Have you got something to tell us here, Michael?
No, I don't. No, but the reason why I was saying this is because we have 3 full-time employees in Thailand, in Bangkok, right? And the 3 of us get together every week, and I would say like once or twice a quarter, we'll sit and talk about cyber resilience, just for us, because we're like, yeah, we're dead serious about it, because I've seen people's businesses and websites. We talked about this before, Gene, but I've seen people's stuff go down, and since we don't work in an office all the time, right? We come to the studio, to record and stuff like that. But when we do get together on Fridays, we'll bring up topics. And one of them has often been, okay, what's going on in your email? What are you doing about cybersecurity and cyber resilience? And if anything happens, if you're really not sure, contact somebody else inside so we can help you out. So like, I know what this feels like, right? And I'm always curious, like, that's why I asked like where the liability lies, because, we're a company as well. And we fit into the category of SMEs and SMBs, right? So I just thought that was interesting. Do we think, I don't think this is a controversial question, but I'm curious what you guys think. Do we think that because of the construct of the economies in Asia and the speed with which we are digitalizing, that we're heading toward like a big cyber event? Do we think that it's possible? Do we think that it is coming? Like, are we worried about this? And do we see any potential signals around this?
I obviously, for the audience, of course, we have some prep of the questions. I was looking at this one, and I think it's very easy to say yes, a cyber 9/11 is coming or Pearl Harbor is coming, etc. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
easy
yeah.
to kind of be
I hope the
alarmist
answer.
on.
I hope the answer is no. To be fair, like I want you to
Yeah.
just go no. Everybody's
Well,
prepared.
but you also can't say no, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
whole
But you
nature of
understand
this
what I
black
mean.
swan.
Yeah,
Totally,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
totally. I mean, is the situation in the environment set up that it's possible? Yes. Do I think that it's imminently happening and we're trending towards that direction? No, right? Like, there's nothing indicative, right, that some type of black swan event like that is going to occur in the same way that could we really point at any of the other calamities and crises that happen on a geopolitical level and say, okay, yes, clearly everything was trending that way. It's very easy to say in hindsight, right? But have the foresight to call it. I don't know. I think it can be a little bit sensationalist when people say things like that.
Yeah, I do agree. I do agree. Although the definition of a black swan, of course, is something we can't see coming. But,
right. We can't predict it.
but
Hence
having
the
said
black
that,
swan name.
yeah, right. But no, look, I agree with Gene. I think that no, I can't. But if we do see something major, I think it would be more along the lines of, say, one of the major cloud providers, being completely knocked out, and that affects all, every business that uses that cloud service, right? And if it's sustained and long term, it could be highly damaging, right? But that's not going to be Asia, right? That's going to be across the globe. And I think any calamity that hits is going to be a global issue rather than just an Asia issue, with an exception of individual jurisdictions. So we talked right at the beginning about geopolitics in the region and various conflicts that may emerge between nations within our very diverse and broad region. And there could be critical infrastructure targeted in a specific country. We've seen attempts on this. We've seen and obviously attacks on power stations, grids, transport systems, etc. could be incredibly damaging to that whichever nation is hit by that. And I think it would be that. It wouldn't be across Asia. It would be a specific nation that was targeted if it was to happen. But it would be front page news. It would be catastrophe for that particular country, and you wouldn't want to predict really the outcomes afterwards in terms of the aftermath. So I think a lot of countries in Asia are now focused on critical infrastructure. Rightly so. You look at Hong Kong, Singapore, other countries where Philippines as well, where critical infrastructure protection is now front and center of governmental laws, policies, whatever, regulations. Hong Kong in particular. I think, Gene, are you in Hong Kong at the moment, Gene? Or?
I'm in Singapore.
Oh, you're in Singapore. Well,
yeah.
Hong Kong at the moment, has is bringing in the CII, critical infrastructure, yes. Laws, which affect at the moment only 100 or so entities, but that will broaden as time goes by. And the requirements are very stringent, and rightly so. This is sort of setting the standards, I think, which other nations across the region are looking at. Perhaps developing nations are looking at as a benchmark for, and Singapore as well, obviously, setting those standards in terms of ensuring the security and safety of those assets that are most important for a country. Because I do believe that if you're talking about a systemic or a major event, it would be aimed at critical infrastructure.
More likely than anything, yeah.
I'd love to add on that a point that Paul made about the regulation and like, for example, Hong Kong
too. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Hong Kong, I think, is setting a good example with the critical infrastructure bill is coming into play January 1st. I think what's going to be where the proof is in the pudding is how will they enforce it, right? So what I've experienced down here in Singapore and other markets, I mean, we've seen the fragmentation of all the different regulations or non-existence thereof, right? But in Singapore, for example, there's this a very well-written data privacy law and all sorts of regulation, but the enforcement has been relatively very light or basically non-existent. I think that Marina Bay Sands recently probably had the largest fine that I've seen, which is a little over 300,000 Sing dollars. That's probably the biggest. That was actually pretty serious. And by the way, for a data breach, right? It was high rollers, customer data. This sort of thing from the gambling side of the house. Now, don't get me wrong. Singapore has no compunction of enforcing laws, as we know. So I think it's just coming. There's a kind of a grace
Yeah.
period. But I was
Right.
very surprised for years down here, where, for example, Shopback had a very well known case where 11 million customer data records were leaked. 11 million, right? And it was a lot. And they were only fined 50,000 Sing dollars, right? It's like less than 5 cents per person's leak data, and it was very interesting at the time. I was just like, wow, like this regulation has so much teeth to fine like 10% of gross revenue, or now it's up to 10 million Sing dollars. But we hadn't really seen like a GDPR or a CCPA. Those are the regulation equivalents in EU and US. The level of type of fines in millions and things like that, right? We hadn't really seen something like that really send a message to the market to take this seriously. So I just comment about that. I think that's one of the biggest drivers of the nascency of cybersecurity awareness in Asia is the lack of government regulation, or sorry, a caveat, the lack of enforcement of the like true enforcement of the regulation to make people change behavior, right?
100%. And we talk about it as being the stick, right? You look at GDPR and how it, the hefty penalties associated with it drive compliance with those, because it's a business decision at the end of the day. If the risk of hefty fines is right up there, we'll get the camera, they're right up there, then your cyber budget's going to go right up there as well. If the fines are only here or non-existent, it probably drives business decisions on how much you're spending on cyber. Another good example, Gene, to add it, obviously we got a lot of our employees are in the Philippines, so I spend quite a bit of time here in the Philippines, and they've got some of the strongest laws in the region, especially around data protection. For failure to protect data or for negligence, a CISO or the data privacy officer can be imprisoned. I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? Nobody has yet, thankfully, perhaps. But you know what? There's very little enforcement. And you're right, Gina. We're waiting to see, how Hong Kong will enforce this new law. I know, obviously, because I'm ex-Hong Kong police for many years, so I know quite a few of the people who are involved in the setting up of this new body, and I have confidence that they'll be taking, pretty determined steps to enforce this. But the proof will be in the pudding. Time will tell.
Guys, one of the trends that I see, this just popped into my head as well, right? So it wasn't in some of the stuff that I asked you to prepare for, but one of the trends that I see sort of across the globe, in not just in the startup space, but in big corporates, right, is this idea of abstracting out functionality from corporates, right? So let's just say there are 3 or 4 very large companies that say to the human resources department at gigantic companies, we'll just abstract that out for you. We'll set up a company for you in the Philippines so you can hire people in the Philippines and don't need your own entity per se. And they do that all over the world. And some of these companies have raised a ton of money or worth a ton of money, but because they're taking specific functionality outside of these big companies, does that leave, do you know what I mean? Does that open up more risk as well? Like, how does that fit into this idea of cyber resilience? Am I explaining that properly?
Not quite with you, Michael. No, you didn't.
So
you mean outsourced?
It's not just outsourced though, right? So here's what happens. Let's say you want to open up let's say you want to have a company in Thailand, right? But you don't want to go through all the regulatory issues of setting it up and maintaining all this stuff like that. But you have these big companies that they set up an entity in every country in the world already. They hire into yours, so your workforce is not just distributed, but not even really yours, even though nominally they are. Do you know what I mean? So they have your information, but they're not sitting inside your company per se. So now you have this double risk of, are we protected? And I know we talked a little bit about third party, but now you have your employees sitting somewhere else where maybe, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Does that add more risk?
Was that clear,
Paul?
Because the previous company I worked for had exactly that model. Yes, the employees weren't actually ours. They were another company's employees, right?
But they worked for you directly. They only did your stuff and all that.
They had our email addresses. They only did our stuff. And
they could do payroll and all these other things in a specific country.
They did payroll, but they didn't manage the system. So I think in most sensible setups, the actual systems they're using will be secured and monitored by the host organization, if you like, not the provider. So. And now companies that do allow them or outsource the IT as well, yes, I would say that's a risk if they're not properly assessing the security of companies who provide their laptops, monitor the security. You need to know what they're doing, what they're monitoring, how they're monitoring. And to be honest, that's a haphazard subject. That's a whole separate topic, how companies are monitoring. There's plenty of companies out there who promise that they'll monitor, and the reality is very different. And there is monitoring and there's monitoring. So you've just got to be careful in assessing third parties, how they are actually conducting the oversight of the security.
Yeah,
Gene, did you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, it's just a general principle of security that if you're more distributed and more disparate, then you're going to have a harder challenge around command and control, right? And just from that aspect alone, you can understand that you're going to be at greater risk if things are split out and as you mentioned, abstracted and having more third party entities that are spread out, right? So to answer your question directly, yes, I would say there would be greater cyber risk from that perspective. There'd be greater physical security risk as well, right? It's just we go hand in hand with that together.
So I want to go back to something we talked about before, right? How important is cultural fluency in incident response, right? Because we talked about like how diverse the region is, how varied it is, all this other kind of stuff. Like how important is that, and do we have any good examples of it?
No. Look, cultural sensitivity, I would say, in the regions is incredibly important, right? We at Theos, we pride ourselves on being an Asia company. So what I realized was working with American companies before was there was very little understanding and awareness of the nuances that you will see right across Asia, and it's a failure, it's a flaw, right? You have to really understand how to do business in Asia. Doing business in Japan is completely different from doing business in Hong Kong, Thailand, Philippines, India, right? They're all very different cultures. And I think it takes years of experience, right, Gene, to, of living in this region and really fully understanding how to operate. But, it's not just that. You have to have full understanding of all the different regulations and laws. There's language issues you have to overcome. And, to be honest, this is one of the reasons why I moved to Theos, because I felt that international companies were doing a disservice in our region. And I think this region deserves companies like Black Panda, like ourselves, who are focused on the region, who are headquartered here, operate, and bring real value to clients in terms of local knowledge, in terms of, being on site, being there, and being able to, speak their languages and to meet in person. I think that's another important point. Companies out here, they like meeting in person. I spend half my time, going out to face-to-face meetings because that's how things are done, right? And that's how you build trust. You look people in the eye and, shake their hands, have a cup of tea or lunch or even a beer, with clients out here. And that's important because trust, I think you brought that up at the beginning, is super important in this region. And I think whilst organizations or vendors from the US, Europe, etc., have the advantage of having perhaps more experience because there's more goes on in those countries, etc. They certainly don't understand the nuances out here, and that's a big gap that we both our organizations or both our companies aim to fill.
Yeah, again, I couldn't agree more with what Paul just said. It's one of my biggest gripes, actually, when I'm back in the States.
I want you to finish the thought, but I want to add something too. Like, I've lived in Asia for so long that sometimes people ask me, what do you think about this cultural thing in the United States? And I'm like, I have no idea, really, because I haven't lived there in 35 years. So I completely agree with what Paul said. I don't, I think I know, but actually I don't know at all. So in reverse, it's context. The same thing. Sorry, Gene, I interrupted you.
No, I agree with that as well. I've lost context in the U.S. And so when I'm in the U.S. And people are talking about so we're thinking about just coming out to Asia and just taking establishing a beachhead in the region. Right. It's like, they talk about it like you're just walking across from California to Texas or something, right? And it's
right.
It's like this area is not a region. It's just like 13 countries that are just next to each other geographically, right? With all the different regulations, different language, different currencies, different labor codes. Paul just mentioned the Philippines. I mean, the Philippines you can't really fire anyone after you hire them. It's so labor friendly, right? But then Hong Kong, you could just look at someone and they're just gone, right? And right. So these are like these nuances and differences that change the entire culture of the company because each office is operating on such a different wavelength when it comes to their relationship to you as the employer. Oh, so many nuances here. And one of my favorite investors actually referred to this as Asia's secret SOPs, right? That you need to know the secret SOPs, or you're just going to walk around walking into landmines. And when people see you that you don't know those secret SOPs, then they come and they're like, "Ooh, here's a Muppet I can take from."
That guy definitely does not know the SOPs. No way. And no one's ever going to tell him either. That's for sure.
You just kind of just watch him like, oh, okay, there he goes. He'll learn.
Yeah, and look, I think I told you guys this, but like I lived in Japan for almost 25 years, right? And knowing
talking to places where you can't fire.
Yeah, you can't fire anybody. I have in my head, I have so many stories I want to tell you, but it's off topic. But we'll save that for another time. But I mean, I've been in many situations inside of business where the people, because I'm Caucasian and not Japanese, they would just talk about stuff right in front of me like I wasn't there. But because I completely understood it, and once they figured that out, they were like, "Oh, okay." We can't do that anymore. But that's why the language is so important. And it's not just in that situation. But again, there are so many little nuances inside the language. And I always say, like, you can't understand the culture per se unless you eat the food and know the language. Because otherwise you're just guessing because you don't get the nuances. One more thing from both of you, and then I'll let you go. This has been awesome so far. You guys should come back. But I wanted to end on this. What's the craziest idea in cyber that you believe is worth pursuing, but most people are just like, that's not possible?
Well,
just for a little bit of fun.
Go on, Gene.
Yep. I mean, this will be pretty self-promotional, but and Paul might know that Black Panda is a bit of a crazy company trying crazy things. So, so obviously, I'm going to be biased to our idea. What if Paul alluded to this at the beginning of the conversation about the bureaucracy of insurance, right? With cyber insurance, when you call and you're talking to lawyers and insurance brokers and getting through the claims process initially, rather than getting to the responders. Right? When a fire starts at your house, you don't call your insurance company and want to talk to a lawyer. You want to talk directly to the firefighters immediately get on site. And so what we did at Black Panda was we essentially productized instant response into an insurance product. And I'm trying to embed, I'll announce it here as well, is that we signed a partnership with Lenovo's ThinkShield portfolio to embed this version of cyber insurance, or assurance as we call it, into Lenovo devices themselves. So I'm attempting to bake in instant response through an insurance business model at infrastructure level through devices and then through telcos as well, which I didn't talk about here, but that's probably the thing that when you ask me a crazy idea, Black Panda is all about crazy. If you hear about us in the market, so that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I probably, can I sneak in two just very quickly?
Please. Yeah, the more the merrier.
Because the craziest idea I would love is for executives of company to stop thinking their cyber solutions can be stopped by big brand names. So both myself and Gene, we get frustrated by this because the big brands come in and they're generic, right? Whereas you get real expertise. You want a proper DFR job doing, come to a boutique, come to one that truly understands or knows what they're doing, has years of experience, rather than a big consulting, what I'm talking about.
An accounting firm.
Accounting firms that say they do, instant response, etc. And if only we could get the executives of this region to understand that they're not getting value out of that, and they would get far better value out of companies like ours. But there's my self-promotion bit as well, Gene.
No, but before you give your second one, can I just agree with you there? I think it's super important and so hard for small companies to convince big companies that sometimes the brand names that they know, like you said, are just providing a very generic, uninspired service to them.
Uninspired is a good word.
Completely uninspired, and that they're not even trying new ideas. Like Gene's selling himself as we're the crazy company over here. And you may remember, I want to give you both this, and I want to come back to you, Paul, but Gene, I'm a little bit older, maybe a lot older than you, but when I was a kid, right, they used to have these commercials for AT&T that went something like this, like if you get AT&T, no one's going to complain, even if it breaks down. It's like, what was my other choice? And then MCI came along and they were like, we're the crazy phone company. We're going to cut prices in half. It was insanity. And You know what I mean? It's just hard forever. But sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah.
What's your second?
No, it's
crazy
hard
idea?
yards, and we're both working hard on getting this sort of identity and brand out there, and being proud of being Asian, right? And that's all good. But the second one, just very quickly, is that I just when I worked with JP Morgan in the States, I lived in New York for a while with JP in that global head of cyber investigations role that you know about. But what I realized was intel sharing was so good over there because it was cleverly done, right? It was at the working level. It was endorsed but not endorsed, if you know what I mean. But it was, the sharing had to be, if you were part of that sharing group, you had to give in, you had to provide as well as receive. Otherwise, you were kicked out. And I'd love to see something like that. Real-time cyber threat intelligence sharing in our region. I mean, but it's a crazy dream because, honestly, languages, culture, and also the Asian thing of we don't share, we keep it to ourselves. It may be lose space, it may be damaging. And, but boy, is it a crazy dream that we can actually properly share intel across this region.
I want to thank you, Paul Jackson, the CEO at Theos Cyber, and Gene Yu, the CEO of Black Panda. You were really, really awesome today, and I know what time it is where you are, so I really appreciate you doing this. It's beer o'clock for sure.
It's nice to be here. Thanks, Michael. It's always a pleasure to have a chat, and it's great to meet Paul as well, and clearly cut from the same cloth in terms of the scars on our faces and back here in TFR. So, yeah, it's great chatting.
Okay, guys. Thank you.